into next week. We'll see. And then I'd like to start the sampling overview today, which is the last, well, it's not the last, actually, second to last. It's the last new stuff to cover in sampling. We'll also have a sampling review. But this is the last of the things. So let's go ahead and get started on this one. All right. All right. So this is, becoming a certified public accountant. Base salary for certified public accountants in Chicago is between $74,000 and $846,000. I'm assuming that's probably a partner's CPA firm. It could be something else too. And that's from salary.com. All right. I think we talked about some of the stuff we already talked about. This is the first page here is sort of like the handout we give to freshmen. If you're not thinking about taking the CPA exam, you should probably at least consider it, because it does add quite a bit to your. Not only does it add quite a bit to your salary, but it also opens doors that normally wouldn't be open. I can tell you that the jobs that I got in accounting and auditing, I wouldn't have gotten without it. But it just makes things easier, and you should at least consider it. Okay, we talked about this before. CPA license, just like a driver's license. How did you get a driver's license? You pass the, you pass a written test, and then you take a road test. It's kind of the same thing here. Here's your written test, is pass the CPA exam, and then you have to get 1 year of experience. So it's kind of the same thing. And similar to a driver's license, you can transfer between states. A lot of times in states, you can transfer a driver's license. Unlike going from state to state, they don't make you pass the CPA exam again, or they might have you take the driver's exam in some states. But the CPA license, it used to be really hard to transfer between states. Now it's very easy to do it. You can literally, you can actually do two things. If you are a CPA in one state, you can become a licensed CPA in another state. And generally you just have to pay the annual fee, the fees for it, which like in Illinois is $300. So let's say it's about $100 a year. So you could actually be licensed in 5 states, but you're gonna have to be paying dues for 5 states. What you can do though is, if let's say you say, okay, I'm going to move to Louisiana. You move to Louisiana, you transfer down there and get your license down there, and then you can forfeit your license in Illinois. And if you come back to Illinois, reverse the process. Get your license in Illinois, and then forfeit the license in Louisiana. So it's actually very easy. And I mean, technically, you could get licensed in every state if you wanted. If you wanted to really pay a lot in dues, you could do it in every state. Okay. CPA exam, we've talked about this. The CPA exam is used by every state. It's made by the ACCT330. We already know that. The candidate needs to have a bachelor's or master's degree in accounting. Now, the new rules are that you can sit for the CPA exam with just a bachelor's degree. Before, it was you had to have a bachelor's degree plus 1 more year of college. Now you don't need that extra 1 year of college. You can actually sit for the exam. Before you get licensed, though, you have to have that additional 1 year of college. So it's not that it went away. They just allow you to take the exam earlier. And by the way, that extra year, it can be in anything. So let's say you started out as a chemistry major, you went through 1 year as a chemistry major, said, forget this, I don't want to do it anymore. Those hours still count. So it is very possible that you get your license without having to take any more classes. And it doesn't have to be in accounting. I mean, it could be in pottery. Okay. Pass the CPA exam, a candidate will need to take a CPA review. And to pass the exam, you got to pass all 4 parts in 18 months. I think you guys know all this stuff. I could be wrong. Any questions on any of that?
I have one question. How many credits class credits do you need altogether to be eligible to take the CPA exam? I know you're saying your undergrad's degree plus a year, but how many credits does that accumulate to?
That's an excellent question. It's 120 semester hours. And it's a 150-hour requirement to get the license. So you can sit for the exam with 120 hours, in a bachelor's degree. And if when you graduate from here, you should have it. Here's the way it actually works. If you sit for the exam, they actually, I could be wrong, but let me check with Dave Knudsen. But generally speaking, if in Illinois, we had to give them templates, and I'm not sure if they're still using them or not. But for the most part, all schools have it set up so that when you graduate with an accounting degree in a bachelor's program, that it meets all the requirements. If you are in a master's degree, it's automatic. There is no other requirement. There's no extra time requirement or anything else. It's simply a master's degree is it. So yeah, it's 120 hours for to sit for. I'll tell you something funny. When I went through, you didn't even have to have a degree. You could, as long as you had the required classes and enough hours, you did not have to have an accounting degree at all. And one of the guys that we studied with was he was an engineer, had no accounting degree, was never planning on getting one either, and he passed the CPA exam without an accounting degree.
Nice. That sounds like a Goodwill Hunting situation, though.
Yeah, he was very smart. He was a very smart guy. Yeah, but you could actually get a CPA license without having any college degree. If you had the hours and if you had the classes, you could sit for it. But anyway, nowadays it's a bachelor's degree, and they had the 5th year. Okay. So the CPA exam 2024. So this is the kind of like I should say the new exam. The new CPA exam. This is the biggest change that there's ever been, I think, in the CPA exam. If you've already taken the exam under the old rules, I don't think anyone in this class probably has, but you have 3 years to complete it under the old rules. But anyway, the new rules are that we have these core classes. It's still 4 parts, like it's always been. Actually, when I took it, it was 5. But the core classes. So there's 4 core classes that everybody needs to pass. And then you have these primary disciplines, and these are, you take one of these, and you can pick any one you want. And a lot of this is it kind of goes on what the CPA firms kind of make their money at. They make their money at taxes. They make their money at putting in systems and things like that, and they put their money in make their money in auditing. So, I'm sorry, I said that back. From the top, it's accounting from the top, and this is a lot of times this is kind of like I'll look at that one, but basically it's consulting, auditing, and then tax. All right. There's only one CPA license, and it does not indicate which item you took here. And here's another kind of weird thing about the primary disciplines. The primary disciplines do not make you a specialist in any of those fields. Now, I would suggest, though, if you're going into taxes, that you take the tax, that'd probably be the best place to take it. There's nothing to keep you from putting it on a resume or anything like that. But it does not make you, say, a tax expert or anything like that. It's simply the CPA license. The license is exactly the same. by the way, the license is really impressive when you see the license. There's a presentation certificate, then they give you the license, and the license looks like something that someone made themselves, something. You show people the license, they say, what is this? You know, what does this allow you to do? Nothing. But anyway, so here's the you know, the options. They go a little bit more into detail on them. So so these are the, you know, there's still four parts of the exam. There's still about 4 hours each. And the only difference is now that you get to choose the options, and whichever ones you're interested in, you know, that's probably the, you know, the best one to go with. They kind of did this actually when I was going through. When I was going through, it was written. It was written with no calc, and you don't have a calculator. But but you would get to a thing, and they'd say, okay, here's this tax problem, or you could do this managerial problem. And so they kind of did this in the past, that you'd have the choice. Now, you wouldn't know what those were until you got the test, but you could take either one. So if you're better at taxes, you did the tax problem. If you're better at managerial, you did the managerial problem. But nowadays, coming next year, you're going to pick ahead of time which area you want to specialize. Okay, the actual procedures for taking the exam. These are the cost. I believe these are still the costs. I did check on them actually before. I checked on them last year, and these were the costs, but they could be different now. So these are the costs that they have for taking the exam. It runs out to a little more than $1,000 total. There is an ethics exam that's required. It's $199, and it is given by the AICPA. It used to be every state was making up their own ethics exam, and the AICPA started making their own. It's $199 with the fees and with the testing and all that included. It's possible to get pre-certified, excuse me, a pre-evaluation. You do not need to get this, but if you want to, you can. So the pre-evaluation application process is $50. Now this is the same as up here. And it does not get you out of paying the $200. So even if you do the pre-examination, which will tell you if there's something you need to have done, you still have to pay for this up here, the $200. Okay, you know, you might ask, well, why would you have that? You'd have that if you didn't know whether some things are being counted or not, and you weren't sure if you wanted to, you know, do I have to make up one class, or do I have to make up 6? You know, something like that. And this kind of goes through how to make up the account and all that. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, once you pay the fees, you will get a approval letter from board examiners, and you'll receive a payment coupon, and this is the notice to sit, and you will go to the Prometric Learning Centers, you schedule a date, and yeah, so it talks about it in here. And you'll take the exam at the Prometric, and it tells you all the stuff, bring up identification and all that. And usually you get your answer within, you know, within that a short time after that the window closes for the taking the exam. Now, scheduling the exam, is that it? Okay. And unless they've cleaned this up, scheduling for the Prometric is actually kind of difficult, in that people jump in and all, you know, way ahead of time and lock in dates, and then people cancel. So sometimes, you know, depending on what you're doing, you might lock into a date, but if you want to take it earlier, you can keep checking back and allow you to get in. It's kind of a hassle, to be honest with you. But I don't know if they've cleaned that system up yet or not. But anyway, that was a real problem before. of taking it. So and the reason I'm telling you this is it isn't a bad idea if you pay your fee in that ahead of time and then get a date, far in advance that you can actually get a date set in time to take it. So if you're going to take it in 6 months, say, well, I'm not going to pay my fee and all that for a while because I don't need it. You might want to pay the fees and all that ahead of time so that you can get a date, close to when you're taking the exam. Okay, now actually sitting for the CPA exam, right, learning all the material and sitting for it. It's a very compressed time. It has to be. You can't go out, I would say 8 weeks at the most. It's a very condensed time that you need to jam as much of the stuff in as you can. And the reason for that is your brain is programmed to forget. It just is. You're walking down the street and a car goes by. It's a blue car, it goes by. Your brain knows it's a blue car, but immediately it says, forget it. You don't need to know that's a blue car. You don't even know it's happening. Your brain is programmed to forget a blue car just went by because there's no need to know about it. And there's virtually most things that go into your brain are like that. The noise of the car, you heard the noise of the car, your brain said, forget it. You don't need to know that. So the brain is kind of pre-programmed to forget most stuff you don't need to know. So the question is, how do you overcome that? We're all genetically predisposed to forget things that we see and learn and all that kind of stuff. There are some things to do. You can call them tricks if you want or whatever, but it's more just kind of an understanding of how the brain works and how do you jam all this material. When you study for the CPA exam, it's probably 6 to 8 weeks of really intense training. You can't go out much further than that. If you learn something 3 months ahead of time, you're not going to remember it. Sometimes your students say, well, I'm going to start studying the CPA exam a year ahead of time. It's a complete waste of time. You're never going to remember. So what you want to do is figure out ways that you can, the most efficient way of putting things into memory. And so that's what we're going to talk about next. Not this. Oh, I want to show you one more thing actually before I go into that. Do not print this out. It's right on the thing. Don't print it out. Wait, do I have it on there? Maybe I didn't put it on there. Oh, I had it. Print. Doesn't say it on my thing here. Okay, anyway. Don't print this out. It's 100 and some pages. But if you want to really go into what the CPA exam, what it actually has on it, this kind of is, they call these blueprints. These are actually, you can actually see the percentages and stuff. For instance, I talked to you about, remember I talked to you about ethics, ethics, professional responsibility, it's 15 to 25% of auditing. Risk stuff like we're doing now, plan responsibility, so anyway, you can get an idea of what's going to be on. And again, these are not, these are kind of ballpark things. But anyway, these are the blueprints, and every year they get bigger and bigger and bigger. But again, there's 100 and some pages in that, so you don't want to print that out. I'll tell you something funny. Just a few years ago, I think they were 12 or 13 pages or something like that, which I thought was a lot. Because it used to be a couple of pages or something. They would tell you what was going to be on it, but now they've really got into it. But and true though, if you look at that document, there's a lot of dead space in there. You can eliminate a lot of those pages and try and make it better. Okay, so this is the important stuff. How do you remember stuff? Yeah, so if you're talking to somebody and your brain tells you the biggest thing you'll see maybe is the color of the wall behind them, but your brain says forget it, you don't need to know that. Now here is something that at most Short-term memory lasts a few seconds, and even less than seconds sometimes. So the question is, how do you overcome that? And to get elements into long-term memory, we need to stimulate brain activity. And it kind of goes into a little bit of synapse structure. By the way, I have no actual interest in this kind of stuff, except that when teaching the CPA exam and you're trying to figure out how to how to learn it, how do people get it in the long-term memory? And me and Dr. Knudsen were both teaching it on the CPA reviews at Robert Morris University. So this is the stuff that we kind of looked at to see, how do you do this? Synaptic plasticity is the ability to strengthen or weaken over time. And it's in response to the increases or decreases in the activity. So in other words, the more you do it, the more things you have connected, the stronger it gets. All right. So we need to increase the brain activity. So this is really the goal of whenever you're trying to learn something, to increase brain activity. It doesn't matter in what, but to increase the brain activity. To get into from short-term to long-term. Long-term memory is actually not that long-term. Long-term, we're probably talking about 5-10 seconds. Once it gets past 5 or 10 seconds, if it's still in your memory, it's long-term. Okay, anything you do to strengthen the synapse can deepen your understanding and objective. And I should maybe make this the most important ones. The difficulty of the task has no bearing on brain activity. So we're trying to stimulate brain activity. You don't necessarily do that by having the most difficult task in front of you. This is another strange thing about memory. We hear about higher learning and the synthesis of an idea into something else, and that those are all kind of man-made up things. The brain, there's no biological evidence for any of it. Whether you're doing quantum physics or playing tic-tac-toe with your cat, it doesn't matter. As long as you're engaged, your brain will show exactly the same activity as somebody, like I say, going through massive calculations and trying to figure something out. The brain does not know any different. The brain does not process those things any different. So we're just looking for brain activity. The more brain activity surrounding the item, the more likely you are to remember it. So so that's what we're looking at. Not, oh gee, I'm going to try the hardest thing in the world and it's going to stimulate brain activity. It's not going to make any difference. Whether it's the hardest thing in the world or the easiest thing. On that same line, so if you have a something you're trying to, let's say there's a, let's say there's some fact, there's some rule or something you're trying to kind of get an idea, why is this rule like that? Why is this independence rule like that? Why is it like that? And you say, okay, I'm gonna spend 5 minutes going over this thing. Your time would be just as well spent, if not better spent, by writing it out by hand 5 times in 5 minutes. Rather than trying to jump through all the hoops and figure it out and have a complete understanding of it. You don't need it. You can actually learn it simply by doing it, repeatedly and things like that. It's brain activity that's happening. Okay. So, ways to improve. Many of you are already doing this. You turn in handwritten notes. That's good. Some of you have asked, do I want it typed in? No. Writing it actually is. Generally, it's a better way of learning it. And it's a better way of learning it because it causes more parts of the brain to work together while you're actually doing whatever the topic is. So whatever you're trying to learn, it increases the amount, and it has a motor cortex of, goof this up a bit, and sensory cortex to do the writing. So this is a part of the brain that, you know, it's actually getting more brain activity for what you're doing. If I push the letter S, there's a little bit of brain activity to do that on the keyboard. If I write it, now you don't know that it's that different, but if I write the letter S, you know, these motor skills, you know, controlling those little muscles in your finger, it's all brains. So that's brain activity. Brain activity is writing that down. You have to, you know, you visualize the letter S, you write the letter S, you control that, you know, control the pencil and or whatever, the pressure on it and all that. Now you might say, well, that just, you know, that makes things harder, right? That's harder than, you know, pushing the letter S. That's the whole point. The whole point is to get more brain activity. Writing it out generates a lot of brain activity. That activity reinforces whatever you're doing. There's a reason for it. You know, the more activity in the brain around it, the brain says, oh, this must be really important. Because, you know, there's all this brain activity and it's around this topic, it reinforces. We're tricking the brain to thinking it's really important, and we only plan on keeping it in our memory for 8 weeks. Okay. So one of the things too is, you know, fill in the blank kind of handouts. One of the reasons why teachers may give you those kind of things is that filling in the blanks, writing in the blanks is a good way to do it. And you can do this with yourself too. If you have a list of things that, you know, you want to remember, you just blank out those things and then go in and write them in. Read notes out loud or discuss them with classmates. Another thing that takes a lot of brain power is talking. You know, kids until they're about, you know, 2 or 3 or whatever, they can't talk. They're trying to get control over their voice, and it takes a lot of brain power to do that. You don't think about it because you talk all day long. You talk on the phone, you talk to your mom, you talk to, you know, friends and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, it takes a tremendous amount of brain power to talk. And talking is one of those things that will reinforce it. So talking about it with, it's a good thing to have a study partner. I'll tell you that I had a study partner. I don't think we really liked each other that much, but it was, you know, we were very diligent. We both wanted to sit there and pass the CPA exam, but you know, having a partner makes a big difference. So, you know, if you can team up with somebody, that really helps. Kind of funny. I had a couple. They kept trying to pass the exam, and then when they decided to take it together, they actually both passed the thing. Okay. So after you write your notes, speak them out loud. And by the way, even if you're talking to yourself, talking is difficult to do. You don't realize it, but it's difficult for your brain. It will generate more. So you don't even have to be doing this with somebody else. You can just be saying it out loud, and it will reinforce your memory. Repetition. Doing things over and over and over again is one of the best ways of doing it. And rote memorization, just memorizing something, is actually a really good way of learning it. And this is one of those things that when you study the brain, you know, people will talk about memorization. They say, oh, that's lower level memorization. You memorize something, you memorize the multiplication table, but you really don't know them and all that kind of stuff. memorization is actually a very good one, and doing things over and over and over again. I'll tell you something that's kind of funny. When I used to teach at Robert Morris University, Robert Morris used to be a secretarial school. We had the students that come in and they learn how to type. And it was more just to try to get somebody a job. And, these were not usually really high level, top of their class students. These were people that, look, they need to get a job, and, this is a good one to get. This is learning how to type. As we got more, as we progressed, we got an associate's degree, then we got bachelor's degree, master's, and all that kind of stuff. However, when we got the bachelor's degree, they said, well, you could actually go from getting an associate's degree right into the bachelor's program if you in the same school, if you passed and all that kind of stuff. And there was a debate whether we should let these secretarial students do it. So we got this first wave of secretarial students. We thought, when you saw their tests coming from high school, they're really low. A lot of them were really low, like single digits and stuff. After a year of typing letters, 5 or 6 letters or whatever a day, those were the best. As far as writing was concerned, those were the best students we ever had. I mean, it was crazy. The writing was, they wrote so well after 1 year that sometimes you think like they must be plagiarizing this, except that they would be doing it by hand with a pencil on a test. And it was simply that repetition, doing it again and again and again. I mean, they could have easily been in an English program after that. Okay, memory triggers. Guided reading, I talked about this a little bit earlier, fill in the blank kind of stuff. Flashcards. This is one that is a really good one. Color-coded writing. And it's because of this. Colors are more difficult for the brain to distinguish than grayscales. Notice I put a bunch of color here. So this is one of those things that will generate brain activity, color-coded writing. So whether you're highlighting, it could be highlighting on the computer, it could be highlighting in your book, it could be highlighting, it could be writing in different color pencils and pens and all that kind of stuff. You don't realize that, gee, looking at something highlighted takes more brain activity. Boy, I'm really thinking a lot here. You don't even realize it, but that's exactly what's happening. That more of your brain power is used to see color than it is to see black and white, gray scales. It's just way to, and humans are one of the very few mammals that can actually see color. Most can't. Most don't. They don't need to. If you're a coyote and you're looking for a bunny rabbit in a field, seeing it isn't. You're never going to see it. So what do? You have a really powerful nose. You can smell it. So half your brain is used for smelling. And if you're a bunny rabbit, you don't need to know what color the coyote is. You just need to know when you hear it. You have great big ears. When you can hear it, you know to run. So most mammals, they don't need to see color, but we do. And this color takes up a huge amount of your brain capacity. So making things in color, highlighting them, using different color markers when you're writing stuff out, those all help. I don't know if any of you guys have had, or currently have Dr. Knudsen. I remember getting books from Dr. Knudsen, and the whole thing would be like, there'd be a dozen colors. And I would, at first I was kind of looking to see, is there some kind of code here? Why are they, but that's just what he does. And that's why, he passed the CPA exam on the first crack, and that's why, it's just, using colors, and that is, you don't realize it, but your brain has a harder time doing it, which is good because it increases brain activity. Pneumatic devices, making up acronyms or songs or something, that's another good way to memorize things. Writing it down from memory is excellent. It kind of combines the first one of writing it down, but also writing it down from memory is about as good as you're going to get as far as knowing something. So for instance, if you can write down the relevant assertions or whatever, if you just write those down from memory, that's one of the best ways to do it. And last, this is a kind of odd one, but it actually does work. Studying before you sleep. Oddly, writing immediately before sleeping is established as a longer-term effective memory. So studying stuff and writing it down right before you go to sleep is a good way to do it. If you need to cram, like let's say you're going to take the exam tomorrow at 10 o'clock or whatever, you can actually study, take a nap, set the timer, wake up after an hour, study some more, take another nap, and then going to sleep for whatever reason, it increases the in your memory. Any questions on that? So it is, the more that you can have brain activity surrounding it, doesn't matter what the activity is, the more activity you can have around it. So whether it's seeing color, whether it's writing it down, using the motor skills and all that kind of stuff, whatever it is to stimulate brain activity will increase the amount that you remember. And this is not just for accounting stuff. This is for anything. Trying to get in. And again, your brain is predisposed to forget things. What color car went by? I don't know, blue, red, I don't know what it was. And one of the reasons why you like, they talk to witnesses like after a crime or something. What color is the car? I don't know. When a crime starts happening, your mind goes someplace else, and you try to get away from it or whatever. And then your brain is really picking and choosing, like, hey, don't do anything but get away. So everything else gets forgotten. That's why it's a blue car. Oh, it's a red car. It was pickup truck. It was you get all these different things because their brain immediately forgot. A is predisposition to do that, and B, if you're in a panic situation, virtually everything goes out except getting away or safely. Okay, any questions on that? I bore you guys. Good. Got your stuff. Okay, let's go to. Let's see. Nope, not that. We already did it. Okay. What a great diagram that is. Okay. Establishing an understanding with a client. An engagement letter. So an engagement letter is basically it's a written document, and it's between the auditors and management, and it kind of spells out exactly what to expect from an audit. The services being performed, obviously it can be audit, but so we kind of break it out to auditor's responsibility, but also to management's responsibility. So two of the big things on the engagement letter are auditor's responsibility and management's responsibility. And again, this is to make that there should be an understanding. It's sort of like a contract. In contract law, you guys probably already had this, but they have to come with what they call a meeting of the minds, or has to be an understanding of what's required. So you're going to have, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're responsible for. This is what you need to do. You know, and if we both do those things, then this contract is valid. We'll give you an audit report with an opinion on it. And you'll pay our bill, and you know, these are the times we're gonna be there and all that kind of stuff. Okay, one of the things we always talk about, even though I don't know how much they pay attention, is the limitations of the audit. These are, we've talked about this before, I know. Materiality, we only look for things that are material. We don't care that somebody is stealing, you know, candy bars every day from the candy machine. Reasonable assurance, we don't give complete insurance, and that there are limitations on the internal controls, and we'll talk about those. Talk about those next chapter, actually. Now, management. They have to provide the financial statements. You know, sometimes they might think, oh, the auditors are making the financial statements, but the auditors do not touch the financial statements. Management must make some financial statements. Management's the only ones that can change the financial statements. The auditors can't. So they're responsible for the financial statements. They're responsible for internal controls of the company. And this one, probably the most important one, is that they have to get access to all relevant information. So if whatever it is, if we want it, if we need it, you have to give us access to it. We want to talk to your lawyer and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Staffing, need for specialists, and I'll just tell you the one that they always come up with. The one that I'll give you one that's common, and then one that they always come up with for as an example. Actuaries for things like life insurance and pensions and health insurance and all that. Gemologist. This is the one that they always come up with. If you're doing if you're auditing a jewelry store and you know, most CPAs don't know anything about jewelry. I'm speaking for myself. I don't know anything about jewelry. So you hire a gemologist, and the gemologist will say, okay, this is, you know, these two diamonds that look identical. Well, this one is worth you know, 15,000. This one's worth 1,000, whatever it is. Because they all have that knowledge. So sometimes you have to have a specialist. The actuary thing, though, is actually much more common, and that's for things like retirements and all that kind of stuff. That is very common to have actuaries that will actually, you know, specialize in that, in the kind of, it's almost like kind of life insurance kind of stuff, but things like pensions, healthcare, all that kind of stuff. Okay. You might need IT people. It's kind of goes along with this. Almost virtually all the CPA firms have their own IT people that they bring in. Okay, use of internal auditors. This is very common. The use of internal auditors is very common for a few reasons. Internal auditors are there. I was an internal auditor, and I used to work, actually the two big companies I worked for were Navistar and US Steel, and they both used Deloitte too. So anyway, I was always working with them, and I worked with them a lot. There's a good reason why external auditors really like internal auditors. A, they're auditors, they know auditing, and B, they're there all the time. They're there all year long. They know what's going on more than the external auditors who may come in for 3, 4, 5 weeks a year. You have somebody that's there the entire year. Not only that, internal auditors oftentimes, because the scope of what we look at is much wider than, say, what an external auditor thinks is material. For example, I think we talked about if Walmart's financial statements were off by 5 million, external auditors wouldn't care. They wouldn't bat an eye about it. wouldn't mean anything to them. Internal auditors will say, well, $5 million, we have to figure out what's going on with this, where did this money go, what's the story, we investigate it, we, do whatever we needed to figure it out. Our materiality is much smaller than the external auditors. We have a much better knowledge of the stuff. Whereas the external auditors might spend 4 days on inventory. There's times I spent 4 or 5 weeks on inventory at an audit. So obviously a lot more time, you get a lot more information, and you can share that with them. So, they really like using internal auditors. Now, internal auditors cannot make any decisions. They can do the audit steps, right? You can have them, here's the sample and whatever, you go pick things and you do it. They're going to check on what you do. They're going to check your work. However, you cannot make it you don't say what's material, you don't say what's not material, blah, 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 none of that. It's simply giving them whatever it is they ask for. So as an internal auditor, they're used quite a bit by the external auditors. And another reason is that not only are they more knowledgeable, they're also cheaper. External auditors, you may be charging at minimum $200-300 an hour, where someone who's working inside the place is less than that. Okay. You must make sure, however, that the internal auditors, that they're objective, they're competent, and they have some kind of quality control to make sure that their work is up to standards. There is an Institute of Internal Auditors. I think it's older than the AICJ, to be honest. By the way, if you look at my designations, there's a CIA designation. That's not Central Intelligence Agency. That's a certified internal auditor. And I got the certified internal auditor because I went to Navistar. Virtually everybody there had was a CIA, a certified internal auditor. So unless they want to stick out, So I'm actually a certified internal auditor, but it was not because of some dream I had. It was just wanting to fit in. All right. Time budget. I think we may have talked about this. Yeah, we did talk about it. Interim work and year-end work. Which one is better, by the way? Which one is more we regard it higher? Which one is more persuasive? So this would be work between year-end audit work will be or after. Which one is better? Is better evidence?
The first one?
Actually, it's not. The first one, you can only use it if they have adequate controls. Now, having said that, there are some companies that, for instance, Walmart, Target, all these big stores, that you will be doing interim audit work because they take their inventory throughout the year. All of them do it. Generally they have really good controls over it because it's their business. It's the most important thing. Walmart, quite honestly, I should say, they don't care about their stores or their shelves or anything like that. But the inventory, I mean, that's key. They can lose a store burns down, they build another one. But the inventory, controlling the inventory going in, that's how they make their money. So usually the larger stores like that are going to have very good controls over their inventory, and you do interim work. So it's a necessity for some places that are big, especially. But year-end numbers are generally better than throughout the year. So doing an inventory at year end is usually better evidence than throughout the year. Sometimes it's not possible, but and if you do run into a store that you can do the inventory at year end and they don't have very good controls, you can insist on a year end inventory. That is one of the things that an auditor does have the ability to insist on, is that, look, unless we get this, we're not gonna be able to give an opinion on it. Okay. Should we push? Yeah, well, let's push through this one. This one shouldn't take too long. Okay, first year considerations. So the year end is 12/31. And here's our income statement. And it's put out on 12/31. So we got our sales. We have our beginning inventory that we started out with. Oops. Okay, I probably shouldn't do that. So beginning inventory, this is what we started out with. Oops. Had purchases throughout the year. And this will give us our goods available. So we had a total of 6,200 to sell. Our ending inventory. So these are the things that are not sold. So 2,100 of inventory was not sold. So the question is, how much was sold? And that's this. So we came up with our cost of goods sold here of 4,100. So of the 6,200, 2,100 was not sold. So 6,100 was, and that gives us our gross margin. All right, now let's look at these inventory amounts. Which one of these inventories at year end would be very difficult to prove? The beginning or the ending?
The ending.
Actually, it's gonna be the beginning. You know, the ending, we can go out at year end and we can look at, see what the, oh, I just messed it up again. You know, I'm gonna keep it messed up. I'm trying to keep from messing it up, but I'm messing it up more, so. All right. This beginning inventory, this is the problem. Because unless we, if this is the first year, we will not know if that, what that beginning inventory is. And notice what happens. If we don't know what this beginning inventory is, we don't know what the cost of goods sold is, right? It gets added in. You know, it gets added into this goods available, and then it goes into. So we don't, and if we don't know what the cost of goods sold is, we don't know what the income is. You know, so that this is the, besides my typing, this is the problem. So the beginning inventory. Now, if they plan ahead of time, they say, okay, we need an audit, and you say, well, there's gonna be a problem because we don't know your beginning inventory. Did you have anyone audit you last year? Most likely no, if it's their first audit. So what you can do if they plan ahead of time is the auditors can come in, only audit the inventory, the year-end inventory, you know, for the previous year. And then when they come to the complete audit the next year, they'll have this audited inventory only. And just auditing the inventory will be much less than the full audit. So this audit, but if they don't do that, you called in, it's a, you know, they call you in December, say the bank says we need an audit. It's a problem because you can't jump in that time machine and go back to the first of the year to see what the inventory is. So beginning inventory is a real problem. Now, if it's significant, if it's material, the question is, what do you do? Because if you don't know the beginning inventory, you don't know what the cost of goods sold is, you don't know what the income is. Okay, so you don't know what the beginning inventory is. And so which options are appropriate if a material balance cannot be verified? Just in general, if you can't verify an account, what kind of opinion do they get? I don't know, again, remember this disclaimer. So you get a disclaimer, so no, it is actually no opinion. This is actually called the disclaimer of an opinion. But if there's a material account that you don't, you know, and again, you're not saying that it's misstated, you just don't know. Okay, so beginning inventories are a problem. So this is the problem, beginning inventory. We can't jump in the time machine and go see what that would, you know, what the beginning inventory was. Okay, so you can give a disclaimer of opinion on the financial statements. However, the AICPA, and this is kind of a vague term, but requires that the opinion on the financial statements be taken as a whole. And people have interpreted this differently. So one thing you can do is give a okay, so if you're doing it on all the financial statements, you have a disclaimer. However, you can also give an opinion, a separate opinion on each statement. So the income statement would be a disclaimer. Statement of retained earnings includes net income, that would be a disclaimer. Statement of cash flows, use the income statement, that would be a disclaimer. But you can give an unmodified report, opinion on the balance sheet. So, oh, that's confusing. There, I made it even worse. So it is possible to give on the balance sheet, you can give an unmodified opinion. You can give a clean opinion on the balance sheet. So it is possible that instead of one opinion, you give an opinion on each statement. And that would allow you to do the balance sheet. Now, you remember that the balance sheet is all as of year end, 12/31, right? Well, you took the year end inventory, so the inventory is not going to be a problem. You can see what the cash is at year end, you can see what the equipment is at year end and all that kind of stuff. So you can give a clean opinion on the balance sheet. And the reason you're doing that is it's good to give your clients something. A disclaimer is giving them nothing. It's a shrug. You know, it's not saying that it's misstated. It's not saying that there's a clean opinion. It's nothing. Here's nothing, and here's our bill. If you give them at least something on if you give them at least a clean opinion on the balance sheet, they can go to the bank and say, look, you know, because they didn't know our beginning inventory, we got this disclaimer. And you know, but look at the balance sheet. The balance sheet has our cash, our accounts receivable, our inventory. The balance sheet is okay. You know, it's just you know, the other statements aren't necessarily wrong. The other statements are just they can't verify the beginning inventory. So it is giving them something, and that is a very common thing for first year to tell them, look, we can give you a clean opinion on the balance sheet, but especially if the beginning inventory is material, we can't give it to you on the income statement, statement of cash flow, retained earnings, because those all may not be misstated, but we don't know. Okay. That's the barking of the dog. So let's stop here. And let's say be back at oops. Let's see what we have left here. Good boy. Who made this stupid thing? Okay, we are not going to finish this tonight. I tell you what, let's we come back, let's go to the sampling overview. Okay, so let me just say stop here. Man, I thought we were going to finish that tonight. We're not even close. Okay, so let's say be back at what? 7:01, 7:11. Okay. All right. Sampling overview and test controls. This is. So far, we talked about sampling and finding dollar amounts. What's the projected misstatement? What's the upper limit? All that kind of stuff. And we're looking at dollar amounts. The classical sampling with a mean per unit ratio and difference estimation. The classical sampling, we were trying to find what the material misstatement was. And same thing with monetary unit sampling. What are these misstated by? What's the upper limit of what they could be misstated by at 5% or 10% or whatever? So that's kind of the sampling we've had up to this point, but there also are other things that go along with sampling and kind of other things you need to know kind of why. And this handout that I made up, was made up for sort of like the things that on the CPA exam that were questions that were asked in the past. And so I kind of made up this kind of handout to kind of go over some of those things that they could ask you about. And some of these are actually covered, more than others. Okay, random sample. This is the best. And a random sample, why do you want a random sample? A random sample is unbiased. Random sample is the most likely to represent the population as a whole. Okay, so the reason why we like random samples is that they're unbiased. And being unbiased, they're most likely to represent the population as a whole. That they are the best estimate of what we have as far as the population is concerned. Okay, systematic selection. We'll call this second best. Systematic selection is when you have a system for selecting it. And let me give you an example. Example probably is better than. We have a random start. Say number 3. I should say item 3. And then take every 10th item. I just made up the number 3. The random start does not have to be number 3. But take every 10th item. So in this case, you say, okay, the first item would be item number 3. Then we take item 13, then we take item 23, take item 33, and you get the idea. Okay. So this is the second best on there. it's generally usually it's unbiased. You might run into a problem where maybe for whatever reason, the 11th item is always misstated or something like that. And that you happen to miss it every single time because, your random start and made for picking number 11. But in general, this is usually not that bad. And I have done audits where we've used this. So it is not as good as a random number generator, a random number table, but it's not a bad one either. And if there is no kind of cyclical problem with the data, that item number 11 has a problem, item number 21 has a problem, that sort of thing. You usually don't run into too much difficulty with them. Haphazard selection. This is not so good. I should say it's not repeatable. Okay. The first two are repeatable. And what I mean by repeatable is repeatable with the same results. So for instance, if I'm using a random number table, we take the first two items in the table. Anyone can do that, you get the same items. Same thing here. If we start with item number 3 and take every 10th one, if I do this, I'm going to take item 3, 13, 23. If you do this, you're going to take item 3, 13, 23. Haphazard selection is sort of word. Oh, okay. Picking a sample while blindfolded. You close your eyes and you pick a sample. So haphazard is when you actually go in and just, you pull out a file, you go, okay, I'm gonna take 5 out of this. You close your eyes, you pick 5 out. Now notice that's not repeatable, because if somebody else comes along and closes their eyes, they might pick out 5 different items out of that thing. So haphazard is not as good. And well, it might seem like it's random. It basically will generally have biases. A true random sample, you could pick, in a true random sample, picking item 1 is just as likely as picking number 95. They have the same probability of being picked in a true random sample. Whereas a lot of times when you have people blind, they'll pick stuff from the middle. It's just the way we are. You don't pick the ones at the ends or anything like that. You just kind of, and it's not repeatable. 2 people can take 2 different things. I actually used this once. I'll tell you about it. But it's certainly not as good. Block selection. Block selection is the worst. A complete block is picked as a sample. Let me give you an example of this. Example, the month of October. I should say the sales for. Okay. The sales for the month of October is picked to represent the entire year's sales. You know, this is a. So we're not going to look at anything except October. So if there's anything from January, February, March, blah, 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 none of those are going to be in the sample. Only October will be in the sample. The problems with this are obvious. There's no chance of items being picked throughout the year. You'll notice on these other ones that there are. Even haphazard, you can be, they can come out, whereas this is just all for one period. And any problem that would happen in December or in January, whatever, would be completely missed by this. Block selection is for blockheads. That's the way to remember it. And obviously it's not to be used that much. Okay, here's a bizarre auditing story for you. Haphazard selection. I actually had to do this one time. I was doing invoices at US Steel, and US Steel has tons of buildings. Those are down in Gary, Indiana. It's 10 miles long. The factory's 10 miles long. Tons of buildings, huge buildings, like rooms the size you could, play football in. That used to be filled with clerks doing invoices and all that by hand. And they had tons of these buildings. There's, if you needed an office, you could easily get a big giant office anywhere you wanted in the Gary plant, because again, we don't have armies of people typing up invoices and stuff. But anyway, so I was auditing, it was an invoicing operation, and they're in this big building, and everyone was down at one end. There's this big room, they're all in there, and there's probably 10 people in there, something like that. And so I'm doing the invoicing, and it's going along okay. And then there's these special invoices that they're more complex. They had a lot of things going on with them. It had to do with kind of production things that were kind of added on. Rolling steel doesn't make that much money, but if you make it into something else before you ship it, a lot of times that is more, but that also makes the billing much more complex, because whatever else you do to it, the bending and all that kind of stuff, welding and all this, it really adds to it. So those are more complex. So I'm looking around for those, and they said, oh, that's down the hall. So I go out and I go down the hall, and a huge, long hall. I don't know, hundreds of feet, a couple hundred feet, whatever it was. I go down and I can hear people talking. And I go in there, and there's one woman standing, in there. It sounds like a party almost, but she's talking to herself. It's obviously she's schizophrenic. She's talking to herself, and I think, I walk in, I need to find these, I have this random sample chosen. I'm looking for these, and she just kind of looks at me and doesn't say anything and smiles. And sometimes she would say something that had nothing to do with what you're doing. Sometimes they couldn't understand her. I hung in there for maybe like 20 minutes. I felt like I don't know how. So where would I find these? And I'm looking at the boxes and all this, and she's just looking at me. And it's, sometimes she's talking, sometimes she's not, and I don't know what to do. So I go down to the other end. I said, what's going on? And they said, well, he's schizophrenic, and it was a union thing. They couldn't make her take her medication. And I said, well, but she can't function like that. They said, oh no, she's incredibly smart. She's a schizophrenic, and she's not taking her medication. They can't, So I go back down there and so I think, okay, I'll figure it out. And I'm going through these boxes and I can't make heads or tails on them. No, nothing's labeled. There's nothing labeled, you know, the box, it was just strange, you know, it was like, there probably was some kind of a method to it, but I had no idea what it was. And I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. So I called my supervisor and I said, look, you know, I explained the situation, look, you know, and it's good. Apparently the thing was she was, you know, she requested to be down there by herself. And that I guess she was retiring in about a year. And so they were gonna have her, you know, retire doing this kind of billing stuff. And my boss, you know, after going to my boss, he's like, "You're kidding." I'm like, "No, I'm not kidding." I said, you know, I can't get any answers out of her. I don't know what's, you know, and I can't figure it out. So anyway, I said, "Okay, go and, you know, take a haphazard sample." Is it, you know, try to find the boxes for about the, you know, about a 1 year period, and from those, you know, pick a sample of 50 items. I think actually I think it was 40, 40 items, and then we use those. So that's what I did. I went in there, you know, 4 out of this one and 4 out of, you know, whatever it was, and we use those. And the kicker to the whole thing was that they were perfect. Every single one of them was absolutely perfect. There was no problem with any of them. She could actually she'd do her job fine. Yeah, I don't know if she could communicate that or find, or, you know, find one or whatever, but they were absolutely perfect. There was no problem with any of them. But anyway, it was a haphazard sample because I think I would still be there if I was looking for it, you know, for those items. But I gotta tell you, it haunted me for a while, and I went and asked the, you know, the people. I said, well, you know, does anyone check and make sure she gets home and all that? I said, oh no, she's really smart. They said, you know, she can function. And I guess that is what a lot of, you know, schizophrenics are, extremely smart. They say, you know, she can function and everything. And just, you know, just not taking her medication, and that's, you know, that's the way it is. Anyway, all right. Okay, stratification. I think we talked a little bit about this. There's an error with this one. I think I picked this up. I got to write down that I have an error with this one. You'll notice down here, the total accounts receivable is 1,293, and up here I got 5,693. So this should be 1,293. For whatever reason, I changed it at some point, and yeah, so we have 1,000. It probably doesn't matter. 1,293 accounts, and here's the first 10. Okay, so we get the first 10 accounts. Looking at the first 10 accounts, which of the accounts receivable would the auditor would be the most important for an auditor to verify? So which one of these accounts, if you look at these accounts, these first 10, which ones as an auditor would you want to look at?
The biggest ones.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, some of these bigger ones are the ones you'd probably want to look at. Maybe that one, that one. Let me look at this one too. Now, there's some you wouldn't care about. You know, do you really care about $28? Even if the whole thing was misstated. If the almost $1 million account was off by $28, who cares? So naturally, the larger ones are ones that you would want to verify. Copy this down. So you're probably the ones, the larger ones. Yeah, this one maybe not as much, but you know, it's still a pretty good size account, and certainly bigger than a lot of these other ones. Okay, so these are the accounts you probably want to look for, the larger accounts. Like you said. Oops. you know, this 77,000 just by itself is probably material. Which account is most likely to be fraud? It's a little bit tricky.
Maybe 6.
Yep, that's exactly right. Very good. One of the odd things about fraud is a lot of times fraud happens in nice big round numbers. For whatever reason, it's very unusual to have a transaction that comes out to 25,000 exactly. It's much more likely that fraud happens, you know, when it comes out to 25,000 or something else, you know, occurs. Because transactions generally don't come out like that. You know, they come out 25,231 or whatever. They don't generally come out, but a lot of times when people commit fraud, they do it in nice big round numbers. It's an odd thing. Okay, so stratification of the sample is sort of like this. We don't want to treat all these the same. You know, this number 3 is certainly not as important as number 5. So we want to do what they call stratifying the sample to kind of see what, can look at those ones that are more likely to be material. So what we might say is this. Okay, for items, for value of items that is let's say 0 to 999. We're going to take 4% of those. If they are valued, say 1,000, to say 10,000, you know what? Actually, I should do this different. Let's say 100,000. $1,000 to 10,000. Well, we're a little more interested in those, so maybe we'll take I don't know, 20% of those. Now these are starting to get more material. And ones that are, say, over 10,000. Maybe take 100% of those. So if it's over 10,000, you want to look at it. So this is what would be a stratification of the sample. Smaller ones. Now you can still pick the smaller ones. There still will be smaller ones picked. However, not as many, because again, they're not probably not less likely to be material. So these two would be samples. You pick 2 separate samples for these. This one actually isn't a sample. This is a complete inspection. You look at all of them. So you have a sample, you pick random ones for under 1,000, you pick 4% of those, 1,000 to 10,000, 20%, and over 10,000, you're not actually going to pick a sample, you're going to take every single one of them. So this is the entire population you'll look at. What's on that thing? Okay. Types of sampling. Some of these we've already done. This one we haven't yet. Attribute sampling. Highlight or bold them. Okay. Attribute sampling are yes/no tests. Attribute sampling. Attribute sampling. Skip this stuff. Attribute sampling is used to test internal controls. And I'll give you an example. Every purchase order must be signed by a manager. So that's a control. Oops. So here's our control. Every purchase order must be signed by a manager. So you go and you grab some, so testing the purchase orders. And then it changes. So for any purchase order, you'll say is the purchase order signed by the manager? Yes or no? It either is or it isn't. In sampling, they call this binomials. And we actually use the normal distribution for this. To I'll talk about it. You guys may have, if you've had a sampling class, you may have already had this. You probably did actually. All right. Yeah, do that every time. Set a clock. Okay. These are both typos. Okay, it's sort of like that. And again, you guys, if you had stats class, I'm sure you had this before. Okay. Central limit theorem. Central limit theorem means that have you guys had this before? The idea is that if you have any kind of a distribution, so let's say you have a distribution that looks like this. As you do that distribution more and more, it will eventually come out to look like the normal distribution. So everything, no matter what whatever this looks like, if it looked like this, if you do it a number of times, it'll come out looking like the normal distribution, and that you can use the normal distribution because it's so easy to use. We have tons of tables and all that kind of stuff to use normal distribution. So for binomials, yes, no tests, we actually use this. Binomials, if you actually do the mathematical ones, they're kind of hard to work with. But let's say flipping a coin. Flipping a coin is sort of like, the yes, no test, right? It's either heads or it's tails. It's either yes or no. So let's say we flip a coin, and one flip, it could be heads or it could be tails. And the probability is 50-50. So, it's equal. Could be one or the other. Now, two flips. What are the possibilities? Well, it's possible that both flips could be heads. Heads and heads. It's possible that both flips could be tails. Tails and tails. Now, if you don't care about the order, it's possible you could have a head and a tail, or a tail and a head. So these are the possibilities. You have 4 of them. So there's a 25% chance that you'd have 2 heads, 25% chance you'd have 2 tails. A head and a tail, you'd have a 50% chance. So you can already see that just after 2 flips, you're already starting to get a normal distribution. Even though, up here it's equal. Every given flip, it's 50-50. As you put more of them together, you're going to get it more looking like any like say, even after 2 flips, you can kind of see that it's starting to go into that central limit theorem. And this is for any distribution, no matter how wacky it is. Most of them will end up being normal distributions if they're done over and over again. It's just one of those weird things, but it's actually very good for us because doing the binomials mathematically is no fun. It just isn't. If you ever have the unpleasant experience of doing it in statistics, the actual crunching of the numbers is no fun. But because we can use a central limit theorem and say, okay, we can actually use a central limit theorem to do this rather than going through all the, the intense number crunching kind of stuff you do in Excel. It just makes it a lot easier to use. Okay. Question on that? Kind of wacky, but yeah, that's you'll find that true with like most distributions will have that central limit theorem. Okay, discovery sampling. Discovery sampling gives a percentage of, it gives a likelihood of some kind of a result. Usually it's a likelihood of fraud or a likelihood of error. There's no likelihood. No, it's IE, I think. No, it's I, okay. So discovery sampling is the likelihood of an error or fraud. It could be after a certain number of items. And let me give you kind of an example. I'm just making this up. But for example, let's say that you have 5,000 items. You'll have a discovery sampling is that if you take, let's say you take, so if you have a sample size of, making this up, 400, oops. Without an error, maybe you're 95% sure that there are no errors in the sample. And as things go on, so for instance, you have a sample size of 700, maybe that makes you 98% sure. And, going up. And at some point, let's say this gets up to 1,000, maybe you're 99.9% sure there's no errors in the sample. So it's all based on how many items you pick without an error as to how sure you want to be with it. I just made these numbers up, but this is kind of the idea behind it. And the more items you pick without an error, the more likely that the sample doesn't have any errors. You can also, there's also ways to use it if you do find errors. Okay, we picked 500 things, there was 3 errors. You could project, the amounts for the entire sample with the likelihood of it of having this many errors, that many errors, all that kind of stuff. There's actually a whole bunch of tables that can go along with that. We're not going to get into that. Classical sampling, we already did. Classical sampling is mean per unit, ratio estimation. We already did these. Difference estimation. This is what we call substantive testing. This is testing for.
Documented.
One more time. Okay, so classical sampling is substantive test. Which needs an N apparently. And this is defined material misstatements. In dollars. So classical sampling and monetary unit sampling is the same thing. Monetary unit sampling is they call it substantive testing, and it's for finding material misstatements. So attribute sampling, you don't find material misstatements testing for controls. You only see if you can rely on the controls or not. substantive testing, what we did for monetary unit sampling, which we just, that big long thing we just did, and classical sampling, these are defined misstatements, you know, what is it misstated by? What's our, you know, projected values? Projected value, projected misstatements. Okay. Looking at the time, this will be the last thing we do here. Okay, dual purpose test. And I can show you what this is, probably easier than explaining it. It's when you use an item for more than one sample. And usually what we're talking about is the test of controls. Testing the internal controls. And classical sampling. And usually you test the internal controls to see if you can rely on the controls or not. If you can rely on them, then you don't have to do as much of this substantive tests. You don't have to do as much classical sampling or monetary unit sampling. Okay, so here's what it is. So we have a sampling. So let's say we have tested controls. And we need 100 of these for our sample. So we pick a random sample of 100. Okay. Now we go to the substantive tests. I don't know why I copied it. None of the words are the same. So we go to the substantive test. For instance, maybe classical sampling, maybe okay. So maybe we need 500 for this. So we're going to pick these. So we have these samples, okay? We need samples for tested controls. And if those go okay, then we're going to have substantive testing of 500 items. So we need 2 samples. Now, here's the thing. If we've already pulled 100 items for the tested controls, we can use those for substantive tests. So in this case, we could use 100 of those, the tested controls, as dual tests. So we could have a dual purpose test. For 100 items. And then for substantive testing, we need an additional. Man, I cannot spell substantive test to save my life. I copy it. How about that? I'm tired, you're tired. We'll have to get 400 additional items. So instead of having picking another 500 items for the substantive test, we'll say, okay, well, we'll use the 100 items from tested controls. Okay. And we'll only need to pick 400 items for the substantive test. So the dual purpose tests will be those 100 items. They'll be both in the test controls and they'll also be used in the substantive test. That's all it is. This is for efficiency. It's to make it's for efficiency. Let's stop there. Man, I thought we were gonna get farther than this. I'm running this class anyway. Wait a minute. Okay. Well, we have nothing to show for tonight. You know what, I'll on the attendance, but okay, so. All right, so next week we'll obviously keep going on this. We're not gonna be able to finish either of those. So there's nothing to turn in, I don't think. Let me check just to make sure before I leave. We did finish the chapter 6. We did finish. Oh, this is why we did all this CPA exam stuff. Okay, that's that. Okay, yeah, any question on any of that? Any question on any of the CPA stuff? And again, it's not, even if you're not going into public accounting, it's not a bad idea to at least consider taking the CPA exam. Just because it does help open up some doors. And like this goes back in the day, but this is before like the internet. Back before you guys were born. Whatever. But I remember I used to do trading on the Chicago Board of Options Exchange. By the way, boringest job ever. You sit there and look at a computer all day. But I guess I couldn't take the board. But anyway, and I had done auditing with Navistar, went into the trading, bored out of my mind, and then went back into auditing. But anyway, when I went back into auditing, they actually had an agency that I went to. I remember I went to them, I gave them my resume on Monday. On Tuesday, I signed the contract with US Steel. It really did open up doors. And again, it wasn't just because I was so basically whatever. It was, I had that CPA behind my name. It's sort of like a stamp of approval, whether it's true or not. A lot of people will think that. So it does open up some doors for you. So I'd at least consider taking it. Tough test. You got to take a review for it. But you can do it. People pass it. People say, "Oh, it's hard to pass." Yeah, but people pass it every day. So yeah, it's hard, but it is doable. So at least consider it. Okay. Any questions? Okay. I will see you guys next week.